Well, thank you, and good morning. Let me add my welcome to Macau and echo much of Samir's comments. We certainly appreciate you taking so much time out of your schedules to spend some time with us here, talk about some of the trends, some of the challenges, and also, to a certain degree, understand a little bit better around Dell's point of view. I've had the opportunity to be in the technology industry for over 20 years now. And one of the things that always surprises me in the tech industry is how long it takes to adopt some of these new technologies. I was in the fiber channel market when that market was literally less than $10 million a year worldwide. And every year it was going to be the year that it was going to overtake SCSI. And probably took 5 or 6 years longer than anybody ever expected for that market to develop. And you look at now move towards iSCSI or converged networks, and that's happening slower than a lot of people, I think, initially predicted. And I think cloud is a lot like that as well. I can remember 18 months ago, going to Beijing or going to Bangalore, traveling around the region, and customers telling me they're moving everything to the cloud tomorrow. And here we are 18 months later, and at least in an India context, we're seeing a lot slower adoption of public cloud services. And I just think that's natural. I think there's a lot of excitement around new technologies. I think people get caught up in the hype, but then there's a lot of pragmatic challenges in how you actually can go enable and leverage those technologies. And so in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about Dell's point of view, our approach, our recommendations on how to approach going into the cloud, and also a little bit about some of the things we've done internally at Dell. Having said that the adoption is a little bit slower, we are seeing it accelerate. And I think there's two key trends in India and in APJ that are driving customers to more aggressively move into the cloud. One is the agility and cost points of public cloud services are putting a lot of pressure on internal IT departments to be able to deliver that same kind of agility and cost point. And I'll give you an example. I was in Bangalore about 3 weeks ago, and I was meeting with a university. And if a university department requests new services, it takes the university IT department 3 weeks to provision those services. By the time they get the request, they provision the servers, the server guy talks to the networking lady, she provisions IP addresses, the networking lady gets to the storage person, and they provision services, all the approvals. It's a 3-week process. The departments are now going to public cloud services where they can provision those services, in their mind, for significantly less money and do it in minutes instead of weeks. So there's a great example of the public cloud, one use case, which is up here on the top left, which is compute capacity for a short period of time. But it's also a broader case of where the public cloud is putting pressure on internal IT departments to react the same way as what you would expect from an Amazon Web Services or some type of public cloud service. I think the other big trend, and this is a different time in technology than we've ever seen, is the fact that new professionals that are coming into the workforce are much more tech savvy than ever before. And in fact, they're much more savvy than many of the workers that are in the workforce today. They've been working on social media sites half of their life. They have a very clear expectation of which devices they like, how those devices should operate, and how they should interact with applications. They don't go to 2 months of training to learn how to use Facebook. And their view is they shouldn't have to go to 2 months of training to learn how to use a CRM tool or learn how to use an ERP tool. So this whole consumerization of IT and the trend towards more bring your own device is putting pressure on IT departments to enable that same user experience on any device I access. I'm sure if I asked you, I would imagine almost all of you in the room have a laptop. Many of you probably have a tablet. Many of you probably have a smartphone. Many of you may also have a desktop at the office. And you're the expectation is my experience is going to follow me, not the device. And so that's putting pressure on IT to be able to deliver that kind of experience and those kind of capabilities. And once again, you go back 7 or 8 years ago, that wasn't really what people expected. They had a desktop, they used it in the office, and they were just kind of happy to have that. So as we look at cloud, at least in India and in APJ, those are two big trends that I think are going to continue to put pressure on IT departments to be able to be more reactive and be able to deliver services in a different way. I think the other big trend up here on the top right is this ability to be productive anywhere. So not only are the users coming in and saying, hey, I've got an expectation of how this device should work and how I should interact with the software, but in addition to that, companies now are wanting to enable their employees to be much more productive anywhere, anytime. We've been working with a big mining company, and they've got this whole concept of the mine of the future, where they can process data, whether it's in the cloud or off-premise, use that data in semi-real time to kind of adjust their mining operations and communicate and interact with miners through these mobile devices. Those are capabilities that would not have been possible even a couple of years ago. And I agree with Greg. I think at the end of the day, what's going to drive cloud adoption, whether it's private cloud or public cloud, is the alignment with those the cloud strategies with the business strategies. And if you look at the 2012 Gartner report, there's kind of 5 key global business strategies that they see. One is increasing enterprise growth. So as companies expand, as the needs of the organization continue to expand, how do I cost effectively manage that? How do I leverage things like hybrid cloud technologies? How do I do test and dev maybe more smartly? Test and dev is a great example of I might need 100 servers for 3 months, but then I don't need them again for 2 months. Well, what would I do with all that excess capacity if it was sitting inside my own data center? It's a great example of what Greg was talking about in terms of the ability to scale up and scale down very quickly. Attracting and retaining new customers. The environment that we've been facing for the last 6 months is certainly a lot more challenging than what we saw last year in India. It looks like it's getting a little bit better here recently, but the funny thing about attracting and retaining new customers is that, in good times, I certainly want to attract and retain new customers, and in bad times, I want to attract and retain new customers. But I don't always have as much budget in bad times to do that. So how do I leverage things like software as a service to go attract new customers? How do I start to harness some of these new technologies like big data to do more focused and calculated campaigns? Reducing enterprise costs. Certainly a lot of pressure on that today and going forward. And so starting to look at things like open source as a very cost-effective way to deliver services. Creating new products or services. Unfortunately, a lot of IT departments today still spend 85% of their budget just keeping the lights on. But that's not really exciting. So how do I deploy more of my budget towards creating innovation, creating new capabilities that will help me attract and retain new customers, help me grow my business, et cetera. And then at the end of the day, it has to deliver operational results. And that's certainly a trend we've been seeing over the last few years and will continue. How do I tie my IT investments directly to operational results? So Dell's point of view around moving towards the cloud is really focused on kind of 3 key areas. One is take a very pragmatic approach. As I mentioned before, it wasn't true 18 months ago and it's not true today. Everything's not moving to the cloud tomorrow, right? But evaluating which workloads might best lend themselves to cloud. Leveraging existing investments. One of the things some of my competitors are going to tell you, and one of the things some of the cloud folks will tell you is, just rip it and replace everything you have and start new. Very few companies have an appetite to do that. They've spent millions of dollars on their existing infrastructure, and they want to make sure any of their new investments leverage all of that existing infrastructure. Number two, adopt cloud as a business strategy, not a technology. Cloud is not technology for technology's sake. Cloud makes sense when it can improve agility, when it can improve efficiency, when it can improve cost. Cloud doesn't make sense when the cost of integrating between public and private clouds, when the cost of securing that, when the risk of data loss or data theft becomes bigger, all of a sudden either the hard cost or the risk associated with cloud doesn't offset that. So making sure that cloud is aligned to the business strategies that you're working to accomplish, we think is absolutely critical. And the last piece, and Greg also talked about this, is innovation without disruption. I talk to a lot of customers about cloud, and they're concerned about a couple of things. One is most cloud providers make it very easy to get your data into the cloud. They don't make it quite so easy to get your data back out of the cloud. So what's your strategy if you do want to disengage or change vendors? Another concern a lot of customers are having right now is that there is a lot of cloud capacity coming online right now. In certain regards, it reminds me a little bit of the dot-com burst that we saw in 2000, 2001. Customers are concerned, if it's a smaller player, are they going to be viable a year, 2, 3 years from now? If it's a larger player, will this still be an attractive market for them 2 or 3 years from now, or will they exit the cloud business? So I would also tell you to make sure that as you look at cloud, you consider your vendor sourcing in terms of their financial viability, their longevity, their commitment to being in the cloud space. And so this looks fairly similar to the previous slide, but the way we think that this is going to continue to develop, and it already has been developing, is we think that internal infrastructure should move to a private cloud. And that's a term that gets used a lot, so let me step back a little bit about what we mean by private cloud. First of all, we think a private cloud should be standardized around x86. It's the most cost-effective, most open platform on the planet, gives you the most choices, and gives you the best total cost of ownership. Second of all, we think that you should consolidate. If you've got 20 data centers, move to 5. If you've got 5, move to 2. But consolidate the infrastructure, gives you better operating leverage, gives you better control, gives you a better opportunity to save cost. Once you've standardized and consolidated, then the next step is to virtualize. Once you have your workloads in a virtual context, it's much easier to move them around. Now, this is also a challenge in the India market because the current estimate is about 30% of the x86 workloads in India are actually virtualized. That means 70% of them are still physical. Moving a physical workload to a public cloud service is a big challenge. All of a sudden, that starts to not look like public cloud. That starts to look like a managed service. Virtualize. So those are kind of some of the key steps. Once you do that, there are several other elements that we still consider in terms of a private cloud. One is this whole concept of an online portal and automation. As I mentioned, if you go to a public cloud service, they don't physically go reprovision servers, and they don't physically go recable things, and they don't physically go and get approvals. That's all automated. And so what you want to do is build a service-based catalog of the different IT services you want to deliver, and then automate the provisioning of those services based on predefined workflow. Another piece is then the workload orchestration. As your business needs change, if you need more higher performance servers to serve ERP at quarter end, if you're seeing a spike on web services, those workloads should be orchestrated. They should move around your infrastructure in an automated fashion based on pre-existing business rules. And so as you look at these type of capabilities, certainly Dell has a lot of these capabilities through our VIS, Virtual Integrated System Stack. But whether you buy it from Dell or somewhere else, these are some of the things you want to consider as you go down this journey towards a private cloud. The last piece that we're seeing is increasingly people are going to want to manage this infrastructure as kind of one pool of infrastructure, or what's being called converged infrastructure. There's better economies of scale. There's much simplified cabling, much simplified system management. And so we think that a key building block on the physical side of the private cloud will be this move towards converged infrastructure. A great example of that is a blade type of a technology. And if you look at India over the last 3 years, the fastest growing segment of the x86 market has been the blade market. So even in India, we're seeing an acceleration towards converged infrastructure. But you're going to want to take some of these workloads outside your own premise, whether that's public multi-tenant cloud, which gives you generally the best cost point, but where most people are the most concerned about security. Where you've got a hosted, managed private cloud. So that's taking all of that infrastructure and taking it somewhere else and having that vendor manage that for you and then just charge you a monthly fee. Or this whole new concept around community clouds. We're working with some of the government organizations in India and Australia and in Singapore. And one government organization may not have enough scale to get a private cloud, but if 2 or 3 or 4 governments come to get divisions of government come together, they now have enough scale to have a very cost-effective private cloud. That's an example of where you've got a community cloud. Medical records or hospitals is another example of where we're seeing different organizations come together to share infrastructure and get better economies of scale. And then the last one would be around third-party clouds or software as a service types of models. And the key to this is that very rarely do you want those to run siloed. If I've got my customer information in my CRM tool, but my financial data in an ERP system, and I'm going to go do a sales call or meet with that customer, I want to understand, are they on credit hold? How much business have they done over the last few years? What type of business? What's their customer experience? Well, I don't want to be going around to 3 or 4 different systems to find all that. I want that all integrated through one system. And as I mentioned, we think that things are going to continue to move much more towards a converged infrastructure. And convergence has 4 elements to it that you should at least consider. One is the physical and virtual convergence to drive greater efficiency, reduce space, and reduced energy. That can be at what commonly called a pod level. It can be at a blade level, but the ability to have server storage and networking integrated into a single type of either a chassis or a rack. The other element around convergence is operation management convergence. This is really focused on how do we empower your teams to become more productive and focused on value-add tasks. As I mentioned before, physically provisioning a server or provisioning an OS onto a server doesn't add a lot of value to differentiating your business. But without it, the server doesn't do a lot. So these are examples of things that you need to do to enable the business to run, but don't add value. So how do we automate those tasks? How do we take those? How can we load that image in our factory? How do we automate the steps and the workflow associated with that? And so this whole convergence around operations management and service delivery will continue. At the end of the day, you're not buying servers for servers. You're buying servers or storage or networking to deliver an application. And the key here is how quickly can I deliver that application or that service? How do I manage and monitor the performance and availability of that application? If I notice that application is not delivering at the right level, how do I dynamically adjust the underlying infrastructure to optimize for that application performance? And how do I do that as automated as possible? And then the fourth area around convergence that we see is this whole concept of service management. I already talked about this a little bit, but transform how IT services are delivered, whether that's on-premise private clouds or off-premise private clouds or off-premise public cloud. And how do I automate the provisioning and delivery of those services and make sure that they're all integrated together? The problem is that many of the solutions that are available in the market involve significant trade-offs, right? In terms of, at the top, some of them are very fragmented, whether that's, multiple vendors are involved in delivering a complete solution, or even if I have it from a single vendor, they have maybe acquired a lot of different technologies and they haven't integrated that into kind of one pane of glass or one experience for you. If you go kind of towards the left, there's a lot of concern around inflexibility of these solutions. Some of the vendors out there have kind of one architecture, and the point of view is that that's the best architecture for everybody. And oh, by the way, throw away your old systems and just standardize on my new systems. And we don't think that's what most customers want to do. The other part of inflexibility too is this whole concept of vendor lock-in. Right? Increasingly, there's kind of two camps that we're seeing in the tech business. Because as you know, technology, the bigger companies are getting bigger, and there's less and less of the small companies. And so there's Dell with our approach around open industry standards, and we'll offer you the complete stack, but still give you choice at every layer of the stack. And that's a very different approach than what many of our competitors are doing, which is you can buy the whole stack, but you have to buy it from me. You have to buy my networking solution. You have to buy my blade solution. You have to buy the cables from me. And customers are very concerned, given the last 40 years of history around vendor lock-in, that that's going to be a pretty costly proposition. And so certainly people want to move to convergence for the ability to get better cost structure, not to get locked in, not to get long times to value, and not to pay more money. And then I think the final trade-off that a lot of the converged solutions, at least today, are in the marketplace is complexity. I might need 13 or 14 different tools from a single vendor to manage and accomplish the task. Increasingly, people want one pane of glass to manage as much as of the infrastructure as they can. They want integration with their existing tools, right? So from a Dell perspective, out-of-the-box integration with things like vCenter or System Center have been very, very important to us to simplify and minimize the number of tools that your team needs to learn and needs to use. And this is just an example of some of the converged infrastructure solutions available from Dell. This is the vStart 50, the vStart 100, and the vStart 200. And what you see here is exactly how that ships from our factory. It's pre-configured, it's pre-cabled, it's pre-integrated, it's pre-provisioned, and we have these with either VMware or Microsoft. So the 50 is with 50 virtual machines. It's already sized and integrated and optimized for 50. The 100 has 100, and then the 200 has 200. And there's a VMware or a Microsoft. So rather than spend $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 taking everything out of the boxes, racking them and cabling them, and taking 2 weeks to get this up and running, this literally ships just as you see it. It's delivered, ready to run, pre-racked, pre-cabled, pre-tested, pre-configured, and ready to run your virtual machines. So this is just an example of Dell's approach on how we're simplifying the deployment and provisioning of physical infrastructure and taking cost out to enable you to reinvest that cost into your business and into acquiring new customers or innovation. And as we look at some of these pre-integrated systems, they certainly deliver fantastic results. It can take anywhere from 6 times faster time to value, 33% less administrative time with integrated management consoles, 10 times faster server deployment versus the older physical environments. So as I mentioned on that journey kind of towards this private cloud, the whole concept around standardization and consolidation becomes very important. And this is one way to standardize and consolidate. And Dell's point of view has been very much shaped by our own experiences in migrating to the cloud. We've gone down the same journey ourselves. We now have over 11,000 virtualized servers. It was only a few years ago we were running some of those old legacy proprietary systems ourselves. And we've spent the last 3 or 4 or 5 years migrating off of those systems standardizing around x86. Today, if you want to bring an application into Dell, it has to be standardized on x86, and it has to be virtualized. So now we're got to a point where our infrastructure is driving our applications, not the reverse. And a lot of customers I talk to, that's the problem they face. The business unit chooses an application. That application may only run on one type of hardware, and the application strategy is driving the infrastructure strategy. And that leads to the lock-in, that leads to extra cost, leads to silos, leads to integration problems. So as we've looked at this journey towards a private cloud, we've turned that around. And our infrastructure now drives our application strategy. A second key element, as you can see here with all of these little cloud bubbles, whether it's in product development, how we market these solutions, how we sell them, how we fulfill them, or how we support them, we have a lot of different software as a service applications that we're leveraging in the cloud. But as you see there kind of towards the bottom right, we're also leveraging Boomi internally to integrate these applications, whether that's cloud-to-cloud integration or cloud or public cloud to private cloud integration. And so just to kind of summarize and wrap up here, so whether you're building a private cloud or considering a public cloud, there's a lot of capabilities that Dell's developed over the last 5 years or so. Some of these came through the acquisition of Perot Systems. Perot Systems had 23,000 services employees worldwide, many of those right here in India, and can really work with you, whether it's on the front end to workshop, kind of assess where you are, introduce cloud and underlying technologies, whether it's an assessment, which is a much more detailed engagement where we can work with you to understand your current situation, as well as the to-be situation that you're migrating to, and help you develop a roadmap to get there, all the way through to design and implementation, whether that's in building the private cloud, public infrastructure, leveraging cloud application services, whatever it might be. So with that, I'd like to thank you and hand it back over. Thank you very much.